becoming a full-time guest. He actually got access to the system today. He got a password, so
he's like
becoming serious.
He's like back in the day when Carson needed a break. Jay Leno was the stand-in host every time. You're Jay Leno, dude.
When you pay me 100 times what I was making previous to today, I'm in.
Yeah.
So,
Hey,
100 times 0 equals
no,
the same thing, but still, it's awesome to be here.
We will give you 100 times my salary. That's what we'll do around here.
All right, we are getting comments that we have no sound, so I think we're about to ditch Restream after today because we have had nothing.
The jury's out.
Nothing but issues.
Is this not a
with
tech
Restream.
company? What's
I know.
up?
Hey, look, we are very just. Can y'all hear us? Do y'all have audio?
Testing.
It shows that we have audio, but y'all are saying we don't. Megan, Chris, can y'all hear us?
Megan went all caps on it.
Yeah,
there is no sound.
She was.
Good now.
Good.
Dun dun dun.
They say they can hear us. So hopefully we're all good. So back to what I was saying. Here with Chuck Yates, Kurt Coburn, and we have a big week up today. Got the election going, which we've been covering the Texas Railroad Commission race for what seems like 2 years. I don't know how long it's been, but
how many? Who else has been to Antina Ranch like 3 times? Like I have.
All right, so let's dive into that.
I want to start there just real quick because I tweeted this out this weekend, and I truly meant it. I think the Railroad Commissioner race this year, despite the theatrics and all that, was a really good thing. I think Luke Warford ran a good race. I think Jaime Diaz ran a good race. Sarah Stodgner, Pump Jack, all that ran a good race because, and Wayne ran a good race. We talked about what the Railroad Commissioner is. So I bet the public education on what it actually does is higher than it's ever been before. We talked about zombie wells. We talked about Winter Storm Uri. We had SB4 implementation and the discussion there. We fixed it. So we talked about the perils of too much government, not enough government, et cetera. So I actually think it was good for our business to have that done. Because I will say this, and I know I've said it a million times, but I truly mean it. If we're going to avoid Europe, it's going to be done by Texans and within Texas. And it's going to be done outside of Washington, D.C. And we may not all agree, but we need to circle the wagons so that it's us Texans deciding what we want to do and keeping D.C. out of it. Because if we don't regulate our own, if we get into problems, D.C. is going to come in.
Yeah, I think Twitter was talking a lot about Texas Railroad Commissioner race over the last year or so. I mean, when have you ever seen passionate discussion on any social media platform about the Texas Railroad Commissioner, right? So, public education, don't know what degree, but to some degree has been, at least heightened a bit about what the Texas Railroad Commission is, what they do, how it's important for Texas energy system. So, I like to think that we played a part in that. We should give a lot of fucking screen time to some of these candidates. So.
I had everyone on but Wayne. Wayne, I didn't ask any of the candidates. They reached out, but I had each one of them on except Wayne. Wayne never reached out, but he did speak at our Empower conference.
Yeah.
I do want to give some education. Speaking of, is election day, and we've heard a lot over the last few weeks that our democracy is at stake. Well, the good news, listeners, is that we're not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. So you can rest easy today.
We have something to.
There you go.
There's a silver lining there.
Our democracy is not at stake because we're not a democracy. Amen.
Well, I heard some stats today that I find pretty intriguing. If you look at a recent poll that came out, who is better at protecting our democracy? The Democrats only had a 4% advantage over the Republicans for protecting our democracy. And it ranked something like 62nd of the issues that voters actually care about. So I don't know what to make of that as a closing argument, because that was their closing argument for the Democrats. I mean, does it rally the base? Are Democrats going to go vote because of that? Is it the only thing they had? I can't figure that one out. So it'll be interesting to see what happens tonight.
Well, what we do know is that democracies are short-lived and end violently. So let's be glad we're not one.
Yeah.
Kirk's the bearer of great news today. So.
Hey, I'm just telling the truth here. Read the
Now on to the Weimar Republic. And,
did y'all see Elon's been pissing some people off, but there's been multiple reasons.
Greatest troll of all time.
Greatest troll of all time.
And he spent $44 billion to do it.
Yeah.
That makes it even better.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Putting up some mad money to do it. But no, he tweeted out that he's voting Republican this election cycle. And he said, hey, I've voted Democrat historically up to this point. And so I just love that.
Let me add one bit of nuance to that just real quick and then throw your point in there. He actually wasn't saying I'm pro-Republican. He was saying I'm pro-divided government.
Yeah, which
He
I thought was
said,
an
yeah.
interesting way to look at it
Yeah.
too. Yeah,
That's exactly what he said.
yeah. And but I love this. There's a lot of confusion around, the past few years, Republicans and like oil and gas lovers hated Elon Musk, and he's like, oh, he's liberal, greeny, renewable. And now everyone that's liberal hates Elon Musk and thinks that he's a Trumper, and he's I aspire to be like Elon, and not from a wealth perspective, but I just want as many people to hate me as Elon. Like, that's just gotta be awesome when you can just collectively piss off the entire world.
Kirk, people ask me about that. What have you learned at Digital Wildcatters? And I go, Frack Slap wakes up every morning looking for an enemy.
You need an enemy. You always need an enemy.
You always need, that's the thing. You have to have
need a straw man,
an enemy.
somebody to go after. But no, it is interesting to your point that he's being called a MAGA Republican and he voted for Biden. Yeah. I mean, but hey, one thing real quick before we leave elections, and we're going to do a deep dive next week. So Mark Meyer wants to come on, and we're really going to study the races and what matters. You've got committee chairmen in both the House and the Senate. If the Senate and the House both go Republican, that'll swap. We'll talk about that. Interesting in the Arizona Corporation Commission. Right now, it's a 3-2 advantage for the Republicans, but 2 seats are on the ballot. That has a lot to do with potential renewables and the IRA in Arizona, because what's been happening over the last few years is the Republicans have held, zero emissions by 2030, initiatives like that. They've held it off because of the Corporation Commission. So 3-2 Democrat could be interesting.
That's their regulatory body, because I saw your notes on there. I mean, like Oklahoma's Oklahoma Corporation Commission, and that's who regulates oil and gas. But I was like, Arizona doesn't have oil and gas to my knowledge.
I mean, I read this morning that Phoenix has the highest inflation of any city in the United States. It was at 13% last month. What do you think is the temperature there for going fully renewable, if that's going to increase energy prices?
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't know that the public views renewables as more expensive. That's part of the issue. I mean, the Democratic claim, the environmentalist claim is, energy prices are so high because of hydrocarbons and that renewables are cheaper. So I'm sure someone in our audience actually knows the lower cost of energy in Arizona. It could probably send us a message.
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Funny thing on Phoenix, I was on TikTok the other day, and just like my whole feed is like things in Phoenix. And I'm just like, dude, Phoenix must be popping. Like, that's all.
The Chinese are good. They want you to go to Phoenix.
That's all my TikTok feed is. And then I realized I had my VPN on my phone set to Phoenix, Arizona. So it's bringing me all these local things. So I will say, if you need to get a place to eat in Phoenix, I can give you some restaurant tips, but no one's putting out any content about energy costs there.
I will say this: top 5 of my meal of my life, Scottsdale, Arizona, F&B. And the coolest thing about it was the meal was just phenomenal.
You weren't going to say Mastros. I was like, this guy's going to say Mastros.
No, okay. Wow, come on, man. I'm a huge foodie. No, actually, the coolest thing about that meal was the lead singer of Tool, is an Arizona guy, and he makes wine in Arizona.
He's a
And
friend of yours, isn't he?
Nah, I've never met. What's his name? Maynard Keen or whatever.
I don't know.
Anyway, but the lead singer of Tool made a Cabernet that was really, really good. So
Fantastic.
I'm kind of for global warming in Arizona because that'll just heighten his winemaking ability. But anyway,
as long as the humidity stays pretty low.
yes,
Yeah, the
water is the enemy of wine.
Someone's gonna take.
It's
someone's
Maynard
someone's-
James Keenan. So
Maynard
Oh,
James-
he was close.
So he's lead singer of Tool, Perfect Circle, and Pussifier.
Someone that doesn't like us is gonna pull a clip of Chuck and just like, I'm pulling for global warming in Arizona.
That was a
Run a
joke.
clip.
just in Arizona.
Yeah, just in Arizona.
Just want them to fry.
Well, you know, when I did a podcast on the energy policy draft, David Ramsey Wood said, you know, that if he was prime minister of Canada, he put a coal plant on every corner because if we could raise the Earth's temperature 5 degrees, Canada would be bearable. So
Well, it's
they'll pull that clip.
No,
first.
I'm actually going to make a Twitter thread about this. I meant to ship it last week, but just an interesting thought experiment here. Let's talk about this real quick. Just assume that we're able to develop all the technology to where we can control atmospheric gas concentration. So, hey, we can say whatever parts per million of CO2 we want in the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
Who determines what the ideal balance of that is? Because you got to think, like places like Russia, I'm sure Russia would love to be thought out a bit and have access to more land and natural resources. And so now you get into this, like, you know, the opposite side of it. We need CO2 or else we go back into an ice age. So who gets to be the bearer of what the ideal temperature and concentration of CO2 is for the planet?
I mean, the Illinois Basin
I thought you were
now.
about to say the Illinois government. I was like,
No,
that was,
no, no.
Yeah.
that was a weird take.
Yeah, we're totally going down the wrong track here.
Stick with me just a second. No, the Illinois Basin right now is having its highest crop yields ever. And it's supposedly because it's a degree
Well, no,
and a
there's
half
actually-
warmer.
There's
you
actually a
know?
NASA study that, I mean, shows the greening effects over the last 20 years. It's because of higher CO2. So, I mean, that makes sense short term. Another thing, I'm just going to dump out all my weekend thoughts here. Oxy announced this huge direct air capture project on King Ranch down in South Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's going to decarbonize not only assets on King Ranch, but from the surrounding areas. And maybe a really stupid question, but I don't know. And I want to get someone on to talk about this. But what effects does that have on vegetation around the surrounding area? I mean, if you're sucking all the CO2 out, I mean, do plants have anything to live off of? I mean, do you just kill all the vegetation on King Ranch? I'm sure King Ranch is, I'm sure they did plenty of environmental studies, but I'm just kind of curious about what second order effects are of that. So,
I mean, that's actually a great question. I've looked at quite a few direct air capture deals. That question hasn't actually been discussed, but when you start looking at these other sort of nature-based solutions, enhanced rock weathering to like plants that grow faster and capture more CO2. I think the big question is what is the impact to the rest of the environment?
yeah.
I don't know if you've been down to down to Surfside and seen the huge direct air capture on one of the LNG plants, but it's gigantic and massive and super loud.
Yeah. I haven't seen that.
And it doesn't take in consideration, like, you know, the energy required to power these things, how much CO2 is it capturing, and what's the effect around the ecosystem. I don't think those studies are known because we haven't had these systems around long enough to know.
Yeah. Yeah. They, I find that interesting. Have you ever heard our thesis on whales and carbon sequestration? You want to go in on this?
Let's go.
You want to hear this?
This is so great. I'll be
Okay.
in the back.
Here at Digital Wildcatters, we solved climate change. So realized that we've decimated whale populations over the last 2 years through industrial whaling. We've killed 75% of the whale population, which whales in themselves are huge carbon sinks. You know, they take it down to the bottom of the ocean. When they
33
die-
tons
Yeah,
on
you know,
average
yeah.
when a whale dies.
Yeah. So, but here's the bigger thing is that whale shit is fertilizer for plankton. And so wherever you have whales, you have big plankton populations. So if you don't have whales, you don't have plankton. plankton sequester 40% of the CO2 in the atmosphere. And so our theory here is that we need to start the new SeaWorld and breed whales and increase the plankton population and get that natural carbon sink back up. Like, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but when you look at this compared to, I mean, you're talking hundreds of millions of trees that would have to be planted equivalent to this. So it's not even apples to apples in terms of effects. So
we still have a little bit in the way of people. Whales out there, but the real problem on increasing a ship goes up, checks it out, and gets killed. The ship bouncing into it. So I mean, we need to figure out that problem.
Yeah, whale strikes. That's one of Mike Umbro's things is how many whales are killed by just being struck by ships.
And if we farm whales, can we use their, I mean, actually in sperm whales, a spermaceti to create candles and go backwards a little bit and kind of whale power?
Crush's really interested in the semen.
I'm an Nantucketer. I mean, that used to be the oil capital of the world at one point.
Yeah.
And so there is some interest in whales and whaling, not whaling to kill them, but I am interested in this, and I think there's an idea we need to run with.
There's something there. So
there's a wildcatter's whaling.
Jay said that there's a sod farm out there that he does business with. He's also interested to know the answer as well when it comes to direct air capture. And then TL Strickland said Oxy will be making more from carbon capture and sequestration than they ever did off of oil and gas, which, got to give Oxy and Vicky some credit. What they're doing with direct air capture, and they've been partnering up with some tech companies I know to see, okay, what can we do with the CO2 once we have it. So I don't know if Oxy becomes just a CO2 capture and sequestration company instead of oil and gas, or they focus on using it for secondary recovery on oil and gas assets. But got to give them some props, because back in 2020, people like myself included, like, what are you doing? You just over leveraged yourself buying this Anadarko asset. Now you're getting into CO2 capture. So
as I like to say, the greatest thing that's happened since April of 2020, minus 37 to today, oil going from, minus 37 to touching 100. I'm smart again. Chuck's not that idiot we fired. Exactly. That doesn't look so bad, right?
It's crazy how high commodity prices will make you look good.
Beta always seems.
Speaking of that, EOG enters into the Utica. Saw some flack going across Twitter about this. Chuck, what do you think?
So they picked up typical EOG. Pick up almost 400,000 acres in Ohio. They spent less than $500 million putting that position together. They announced a 20-well pilot program. When I originally read this, I said, okay, EOG's going all in natural gas, but it's actually in the oil window. So this is typical EOG. They usually go study things really well. When they go into some place, they're generally right when they do it. So
got to be really surprised that they picked this over the Buddha. Did we ever tell you about our Buddha conspiracy theory?
I want to hear this one.
Okay, so Chuck does this podcast with this guy, and guy is a super smart guy, and he's convinced that EOG has a secret play that they're building out infrastructure for down in Buda up in East Texas in
Madison County.
Yeah. And so, outside College Station. So we do a podcast on it, and it starts blowing up, and you start seeing like comments over on Reddit, like, hey, I heard EOG's got a big play in the Buda that's developing. And so we started seeing like in the internet. So it became this whole like shtick.
If you ever want to laugh, just go on Twitter and look up Budagate, Buda.
I don't know.
I called it Buda. I've always
some people put an H in there, but anyway, we called it Budagate. The greatest thing about that is I dropped this podcast the next day. EOG has triple the normal daily trading volume in stock.
No way.
There's been 3 times. 2 times after we've worked with EQT stock pumps. We do EOG stock pumps. So we have. I don't care what anyone tells us. We have the ability to pump some major stocks,
But
we
mean,
don't, and we don't have any investments in them. So
Yeah,
for the SEC listening,
I
we
don't.
don't do
Yeah, I don't own any EOG. This is not intended as investment. Past performance is
TL
not
said,
indicative.
he
of
said
future.
Buddhagate again. Buddhagate will never
So this
die.
is what I heard, and I have not talked to Greg Kane. So Greg Kane's like an old school land scout. I mean, he jumps the fence, reads the meter,
Love
like
it.
the old guys used to. And his whole thing was basically that there was this infrastructure build out, and that if these were volumes from the Permian, the North Path, or if this was stack scoop volumes coming down, you just have big pipelines, one right away, right? But there are actually 6 different pipelines being built that fan out across Madison County and then gather back at Cleveland. So that was the big guts of his thing that I couldn't explain.
Yeah.
I've actually heard that Greg got it right. It's not Buddha, it's Comstock in the Haynesville. And that if you actually look at what they drilled, I heard this at Fuse over a couple of beers. If you looked at what they just drilled, there's a massive well there. And who would do something like that? Jerry fucking Jones. So maybe there's some truth there.
All right, we got to go dig into that a bit. But EOG, interesting model because historically they've been the ones that they go move into an area, they really spend a lot of time discovering new plays. And so I'm curious how that business model works moving forward when it seems that we're running out of, tier 1 shale.
So, and I've got a question for Kirk on this because you're going to know this better than me. I will say this as a statement, but it's really a question to you. I don't see a technology sitting out there that in the next 5 years we look up and go, oh my gosh, all this new land is in play, like we did, 15 years ago with horizontal drilling and modern fracking. I mean, you saw what we did in natural gas and you said, okay, if we can apply that to oil, this will happen. And it's not that you could pound the table, but you could at least in hindsight go, okay, I could see how that's happening. I don't see anything like that out there that's going to be a game changer in oil and gas production, development, drilling. It feels
from
like
a technology perspective.
From a technology, is there anything out there that's in the lab or something? I mean,
the only promising technology is the small modular reactors on the nuclear side. I mean, there's some cool tech there.
Yeah.
But on the oil and gas side, I think it's incremental. There's, I think, quite a few great investments out there. But let's look at it. I mean, if you think about like carbon capture and storage, for example, I don't know if you remember that project from 2016, the Petra project. That was the carbon capture project. It was $1 billion project that was put next to the NRG coal-fired power plant here in Houston. It's been mothballed because it didn't perform. So I think hard tech is still a place we need to spend a lot of time investing and thinking about. It's going to make a lot of improvements because oil and gas is going to be needed. It still powers 80% of Europe. I mean, let's just go there for a second. And I'll get to that because I've been thinking about Europe for a second. But ultimately, it's about incremental improvements because we're going to need it. And there's been such an underinvestment because of what's happened lately. That I think we're going to see maybe some massive improvements because of there needs to be more investment.
Well, so here's the thing about technology. What's cool about technology?
I love technology.
So what's cool about technology, though, is that there's something out there that exists that we're not aware of yet, right? And so if you would have talked about horizontal drilling in a shale back in the 80s, they would have looked at you and be like, what the fuck are you talking about?
But those two technologies were from the 40s and the 70s.
So we drilled our first horizontal well in 1937.
Yes. But let me get to where I was going.
Okay, 40s, 37.
So,
yeah, exactly.
But the technology of horizontal drilling, it wasn't really a technological advancement per se in the mechanics of doing it. It was that, hey, we had this underlying rock, the source rock. Like that was, that was the key.
And we have
right?
$10 gas to pay for some experiments.
And
on
so
it.
Anyways, there's not another shale. Like you can't, unless we, disprove thermodynamics and prove abiotic theory that oil comes from the Earth's mantle, which look, I'm always up for a good theory.
We need an
but-
expert like that to come on the podcast
Yeah.
because I want to talk about that. So
Yeah.
if you're
That's
out
a
there,
great point.
reach out.
Yeah.
And what about a whale expert too?
And a whale expert.
I've already
We've been
got two.
trying.
They reached
Okay.
out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yep. Got some marine biologists that actually did studies on whale populations. And look, it sounds like they love the idea. So anyways, but here's the thing.
Whale sex. Here we go.
Okay.
Woo!
To answer your question, is there any technology in oil and gas that has material step change to production? The fact is, in shale horizontal wells, we only recover 4 to 5% of oil in place. That means that there's 95% of the oil in the reservoir is still there. So I think that there are going to be some really cool technologies that come for secondary recovery.
Absolutely.
And so that's always the X factor for me because, even if you back out climate, you have to look at our energy source. Oil and gas powers 80% of the world, but it's a finite resource as far as we know. And if it's a finite resource, well, then we need to start developing other technologies. That way we make sure that we have the energy that we need to power the world. So, there's always a lot of talk over the last decade or the last few decades about peak oil supply.
Mhm.
And no one has any clue what that is. But there is this X factor in, hey, if we can figure out how to actually recover the majority of the oil that's in place, I mean, that could have massive effects on supplies. So
The one thing I've heard they're doing is in the Eagleford, because it was drilled so early on in the shale revolution, and you didn't figure out spacing, you didn't figure out how big fracs could go. I think there have been some programs started there to go in and refrac old wells, particularly the old wells that weren't downspaced. So there's
that's what I used to do refracs with our expandable casing. So we were already doing that stuff for like Chesapeake up in the Barnett back in like 2016.
Yeah.
I was going in and these old gas wells and doing refracs on them. So stuff like that,
But my point is,
Shell's drilling their horseshoe
Right.
wells. So I mean, look, super bullish on human ingenuity. And so there could be some technology 10, 20 years out from now in oil and gas that we're not talking about today. But, to Kirk's point, like
that's what I always tell mom. I always tell mom, it's like, you tell me the price of oil and I can go get you more.
yeah,
$200 a barrel, I'll get you more. I guarantee that.
Yeah,
So,
but this is a good point to ask the entrepreneurs listening. Like, you got an idea, come bring it to us. Let's hear it.
yeah, because my only point was, in the next 5 years, is there something out there that we could see materially happening in the next 5 years? And I just don't see it. But I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah.
All
right. We went from EOG entering the Utica to, man, we've kind of crossed the entire spectrum talking about whale sperm. EOG entering the Utica.
Real
Last
quick,
thing we have.
Yeah, go ahead.
Tell me what this is about. Cheniere
obtains their first parent level investment grade rating from S&P.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, which is how often did
explain what that means?
It means basically that they're saying the debt is investment grade, i.e. it's worthy debt. It's not high yield junk, lower interest rates.
Yeah.
The point is, this company teetered on the verge of bankruptcy.
How many times?
Yeah, like a lot.
I mean,
the problem with being a cat,
all the time.
Yeah, the problem with being a cat, you never know when you're on life number 9.
That's right.
But my favorite Cheniere story is, so we're at Kane and we have a sublet from Cheniere in 717.
I thought you were still with Kane. What happened?
Oh yeah, that's funny. The motherfucker who got fired too is like, smack at me. Okay, that's great. No, but no, so we had a sublet from Cheniere on 717 Texas, and when they go bankrupt, Judge breaks all the contracts, right? And we were way below market on this, and we were just going, oh man, our real estate costs are going to double. And GSO comes in and gives them $500 million, staves off bankruptcy. So we sent a bottle of champagne to Dwight Scott saying, thanks, dude. You saved our lease.
Thanks for saving everyone.
We really appreciate that. So anyway,
there was an interesting
Did he write a thank you letter?
He did not write one, but he did laugh. He called us and laughed.
Okay, good.
There was I think we might have talked about this on BDE, but there was a story about Cheniere's founder, Sri Suki, on, I think it was on New York Times a couple of months ago. And really interesting story because he was the owner of the restaurant in Los Angeles where Nicole Simpson was last seen the night that
Mezzaluna.
that she was murdered. So he owned that restaurant, and just, I mean, the restaurant was just
Wow.
yeah, just wild with everything that was going on. And he ended up, I don't know if he closed it or sold it down, but just did not want to do that anymore. And so he looked for his next thing and landed on oil and gas and LNG. And so goes and raised billions of dollars, build an LNG import facility, because at that time, this is like 2008, I think, 2009,
2004. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe a little bit earlier. Yeah. And before Shell, and raises billions of dollars, builds this facility, and then all of a sudden we became a massive producer of nat gas. And so then he had to go raise billions more to retrofit it. Yeah, to make it an export facility. So really just wild story there of how he went from restaurant owner to building these massive LNG
and
facilities.
now they're investment grade.
Yeah, now they're investment grade.
So my thing I love about, I watched the OJ trial I was fixated on it. And OJ's defense team talked about, going to his house, to Nicole's house, to Mezzaluna and all that was like hours of traffic. There's no way OJ did it. I drove into the neighborhood because I was in LA going, I wonder how long this takes to get. It was like 3 minutes, and I saw each one of those places twice. They're just all right there.
Hey, wait a minute. They're still looking for the killer, Chuck.
So
this is Mythbusters Chuck edition.
So my brother Jay actually saw OJ Simpson in the San Jose airport and walked up to him and said, "Hey OJ, I got a line on the real killers." And OJ freaked out and ran off.
I used to tell this joke when I was in kindergarten. That's when all of that was happening. And the joke was, what did OJ ask the judge? And they're like, what do you ask? Like, can I have my gloves back? And my parents and everyone thought it, like, I had no fucking context, like why that was funny. I just knew I heard it and I knew it got a laugh. So, yeah.
So you use it. My favorite joke along that lines was, OJ did it. He did everything but leave his Heisman Trophy there. So, all right, we got finger of the week. I usurped it this week. So anyway, let's take a look.
No more drilling. There is no more drilling. I haven't formed any new drilling.
So good.
The Biden close. I mean, literally his close to America, high inflation, all that is no drilling. What, 3 weeks after berating the oil and gas companies for not pumping more?
He tweeted 24 hours after that. So he says that no more drilling. And then he tweets this: do you know how much 6 of the largest oil companies have made over the last 6 months? Over $100 billion. That money should have been used to expand supply and lower prices at the pump. How do you expand supply without drilling? Like, this is either just the biggest gaslighting. I'm not going to say the biggest, because I believe COVID was the biggest gaslighting experiment. But I mean, just the amount of gaslighting here, or just fundamental misunderstanding of how oil and gas and energy works. You cannot increase supply without drilling.
Well, last week, Chuck and I also broke down not only the net profits of Apple, Amazon, and Google, which way surpass the oil and gas industry, not only on an actual dollar basis, but on a percentage basis. So there's multiple gaslightings going on here.
Yeah.
Number one is, we all know that oil prices are set by the global commodity markets, not the individual companies. And secondly is, hey, don't look over here, because tech is making a killing on all of us that are stuck at home. Mm-hmm. We're using Amazon, we're using Google. Too bad for the small business guys. I mean, shit put out of business. But let's go after the big bad oil and gas companies for raising prices.
Well, I remember a tweet in 2020, Zoom, the video call Zoom, their stock had just, grew exponentially during 2020 and overtook Exxon's market cap.
Yes.
And I remember everyone on Twitter dunking on Exxon, being like, oh, this is a sign of the times. Zoom is now bigger than Exxon. I'm like, how do you guys how can you not zoom out? No pun intended. How can you not zoom out and see what's happening? And now, ever since then, Zoom has, I don't know what they've drawn down, but something massive, probably 60, 70%. And Exxon is just riding a wave. So that's it's a sign of the times.
But you know, we can be silly and
Damn, I'm
funny
good.
here on
Zoom down 68% on the year.
Yeah. Good thing we don't have any micro content of you saying, damn, I'm good. So
Yeah.
now I'm relieved. But in all seriousness, we can be silly and goofy here on BDE, but I was quoted this weekend. They did a write-up in the Midland paper, and I truly mean this. Energy deserves a thoughtful discussion because at the end of the day, people die if we don't get this right.
Yeah.
I mean, when you buy energy from a tyrant, guess what? People die. When you spend way too much on a transition, people freeze. I mean,
look at Europe right now.
Yeah.
They're going almost against their climate commitments because they're worried about if it's a cold winter, Europe's is fucked. Let's just be honest.
So, I mean, there has been so much shift in the mindset over the last 6 months. Like one of my friends who is super into climate is now a huge supporter of nat gas and oil and bringing sustainability to the industry, because if you don't, what happens? You revert, and it's actually negative for any climate work, right? So people are smart people that are intellectually honest are able to see that.
I mean, there was a great article on Toby Rice, who runs EQT, yesterday in the Financial Times about he wants to export LNG to Europe because it's going to lower prices there. And he has a great vision, but he's thinking about what the world needs. Now it benefits him, but it does benefit everyone else. And I think that is the problem when I got into energy in 2010, and, you know, people that don't understand it, judge it.
Yeah.
But it's a hard, you know,
regulate it, make laws about it, etc.
This is hard. It's not an easy answer.
My favorite thing about Chuck being in this article on the Midland Reporter Telegram is he's like, yeah, you know, no one messaged me to say like, hey, I saw you in the MRT. I'm like, yeah, no one read that shit. So.
My mom did.
Anyways,
Thanks,
all right.
Mom.
That closes out our show this week. Appreciate y'all tuning in with us and hanging out with us in the comments. As always, we will be back next week, 10:30 a.m. Central Time on Tuesday. Catch y'all there.